Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Footmarks. I'm Varun, and this is Jarrod. So, Jarrod, Sanju Samson is about 30 years old right now. 30 is an interesting age if you're a batter, right? You can either be hitting your peak and you just be dominate for the next 5 or 6 years, or you could just have a steep decline and just be forgotten in history. So with Sanju, he's been playing IPL for absolute eternity. I feel like I've seen him forever at this point. He almost from the moment I've started watching IPL, I've almost seen Sanju. So he's at an interesting point, especially because I think if you look at India in general, just aren't very good at using 30-year-olds. Like, unless that 30-year-old has been playing for like 8 years and dominated. Like, unless if you're like a Virat Kohli or like a Rohit Sab style of player who's been good for like his whole life, India don't look at 30-year-olds and be like, okay, we can use him. It's always, we want the new young batter. And even fans are always like, if they see you for too long and you aren't very good, they usually get sick of you quite quickly, right?
Yeah, I actually think it's really interesting if you look at the way that sort of sport should work, most people would peak, depending on their role in their team, whichever sport it may be, it's probably going to peak late 20s, right? Mm-hmm. Even fast bowlers, probably going to peak in their mid-20s, right, rather than anything else. And yet, we as international teams, we set up the same way that, like, I don't know, an American sports league does, which is you want to get young players in, and then hopefully they'll be around for 15 years. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense if like the person is a next level tier star. But most people probably, why wouldn't you just wait until they're getting close to their peak and they understand their game? Like, you'd have to ask, what England has got out of all these years of Zach Crawley sucking, right? Whereas like if they thought he was going to be good, why not just keep him in the A tour, bring him in every now and again to see if he's ready, and then wait for him to hit 27, 28, and then be like, bang, the Michael Vaughan years, right? And then you're like, look how good he is. And then Michael Vaughan collapsed like a house of cards the minute he got over his best, right? But that's not how cricket has ever worked. And India are kind of like, I feel in some ways India are more wedded to like the old school knowledge of cricket than most other countries, where, well, probably from the mid 2000s, Australia started going, actually, maybe we should just pick guys around the age of 27, 28, and then everyone will be at their peak and they'll be really good, right? And India's still sitting around going, do you know what, everyone? Vice captains are really, really important. And we're only going to pick players who are going to play for the next 10 years. And I just, you can't possibly, like, you and I have watched a lot of Jaiswal. We both think he's a very good T20 player and, you know, maybe will go on to be one of the top tier stars. I don't think either of us look at him right now and go, he knows exactly what he's doing in T20 cricket compared to Test cricket, where you're like, no, he's ready. There's no issue there. T20 cricket, sometimes I'm like, what are you doing? That doesn't make any sense, the last 4 decisions you've made. And so to get back to the Andrew Samson point you're talking about, I think that it's a very good...
Andrew Samson?
Andrew Samson, the statistician, Sanju's brother. The Sanju Samson point is he's 30 and he should be at his peak. And yet because of the kind of cricket culture that currently exists, it feels like he's done, right? And it's like, it's very, very weird. And it's... ultimately, I think it means you miss out on picking on players who are experienced and ready, because you keep looking for the 12-year-old who's going to come in and average 55.
Yeah, that's one thing which I always thought Australia were almost the masters of, is getting the age curve right. Where if you ever look at an Australian team, it's, well, especially when they're at the best, you have like one young player. You usually have like one player who's, let's say, past their peak but still getting runs. And then you have about 3 or 4 guys who are at the batting peaks, right? I always thought India was just quite bad at doing that, where it's like they'll usually just have a bunch of guys who are young, and if all of them hit the peak at the same time, it's quite good, like a la the 2000s team, where, or like we saw later with Rahane, Kohli, Pujara, and Rohit, because all of them were the same age. They were all like, it took them a while to get going, but then when all of them were at their peaks, India were great. But then the issue I had with the Test team, I know it's a different format, was at some points was, well, it's like everyone's either very young and just years away from the batting maturity, or everyone's washed. Like, there's no one who in that Test team who was like, okay, they know who they are at the peak, right? But that's one thing which, with the T20 team, I think usually, like, India are quite bad. The one 30-year-old they got absolutely spot on was Suryakumar Yadav, right?
Yeah.
They picked him when he was 30, because he probably wasn't ready to be an international quality player before that. They got him at the right age, and look at what he's given them, India, right? Let's say he's got 2 more years in him. That's 6 great years you've gotten out of him, right? And that's what you should be doing with the T20 team. I always felt that's one thing I love about this current T20 side, is the age curve is spot on. You have guys who are at their batting peaks, you have guys who are going to hit their batting peaks, and all it's blended together beautifully, right? And I'm like, well, why would you not also use Samson in that? That initial assessment for me was with Samson was, so to speak, if you're just going to replace him with, like, I don't know, like another young player who might be hitting his peak, would you not just be affecting that balance?
So there's no right answer for anything like this, right? Because if you think back to Australia in the 1980s, which is obviously a long way before your time, you had Alan Border, who was kind of in his peak, and then they had Dean Jones, Steve Waugh, David Boone, all coming through at the same time. They could have picked Mark Taylor at that point as well, even Mark Waugh. But they were like, we kind of trying to balance these two things at the same time of a little bit of experience and the youth coming through. So at that stage, it makes sense picking 3 young players because your older players probably aren't, your older players like Jeff Marsh, who really aren't making a lot of runs, or Greg Ritchie, who really aren't up to it, right? And so it makes sense at that point to sort of go with 3 younger players. It doesn't make as much sense for Australia to do that in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that's where they eventually get to, right? They tried all those guys as young players. Martin and Hayden and Langer and, all those guys. There was heaps of them. Came in. Some of them disappeared forever. Some of them came back when they were ready in their peaks. That makes a lot more sense. And from that period onwards, Australia's been like, okay, well, if we can find a Michael Clark, right, or a Phil Hughes or a Steve Smith or someone that we really believe in, that's fine. Or Usman Khawaja, we'll bring him in. Oh, he's not quite working. Let's give him a break and then bring him back when he's ready. That doesn't seem to really be the argument of India now. It's like Prithvi Shaw went from being good enough to open the batting for India to never have been. I don't know if he's still alive.
Not getting an IPL contract, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I don't know if the man exists anymore. And Karan Nair, we just saw do a similar thing, and it's like that is a too extreme way of doing it. So what you should be doing is going, okay, as you said before, looking for. And let's say it's India, so there's more. Let's say you've got 2 future batting prospects that you're willing to carry until they get great. And then when they're ready and they move on, you can bring in another couple. But that doesn't mean that you have to be constantly moving out the 30-year-olds who are doing the job. And I think that's where Sanju Samson's kind of ended up in this weird position where you and I would both say that he's not a perfect player and that he's not an A-tier player. But is there another side in the world that wouldn't take Sanju Samson at the moment with his skill and his experience? I just don't think there is. So are you moving on from him just because you want another younger player to come in? Or in this case, it's not even that, because you wouldn't say that Shubman Gill is a particularly young player. They're literally moving him on because eventually Shubman Gill will become the captain of the T20 side. Okay, does he have to be in there now? Like, it's a very odd decision for me.
Yeah, so the way I saw it is I think India still probably wants someone in that Kohli mold in the team, where it's like, and Shubman Gill, I think it's fair to say he is the evolution of Virat. And before people get upset with him, I'm not saying he's necessarily better T20 player than him yet. He's clearly
That's
just
what you
the
said
next
off
step.
there.
That's what I'll say, fair, because I think we'll get to that in a bit. So it's like, so he's the next evolution, right? I think he's a great player of spin. I think the only weakness I see in him is he isn't very attacking in the power play. But I don't know how much of that is him or him playing with the Gujarat team where Tewatia was the number 5. So I can't blame him for not attacking in the power play. So that's where I see the team thinking. And also the other logic I had with the Indian team was, if they, let's say they do go all in on bowling, where they pick Kuldeep, Varun and Arshdeep and Bumrah, it makes sense to have a Shubman Gill type player in the top 7. In that case, you need some stability, right? I don't think you can go with all attacking players in that. But if they go with batting at 8, I don't see the point of Gill. And the other thing is also that World Cups are usually lower scoring and knockouts are very high volatile. So India may be still a bit more old school in that sense. So I understand the thinking. And the thing I'm really annoyed with this, Jarrod, is the noise around the internet has been so stupid around Shubman Gill, where people are acting like he's Kane Williamson or Mohammad Rizwan in T20 cricket. It's gotten to the point that I have to defend an anchor. Like, do you know how disgusting I feel defending anchors? Like,
it's terrible. I don't, I feel sorry for your pain. No, look, I think it's a good point. I think it just doesn't look like they've brought him in for cricket reasons, though. Well, I should say for batting order reasons. And so everything that you and I have just talked about kind of makes sense. But at the same time, it does feel like they've brought him in because he's going to be the captain and they want him around. And it's like, okay, but you're changing your style then a little bit. And as you said, maybe that for the next World Cup, that makes sense, right? Bring in an anchor if it's going to be another low scoring event or whatever that may be. But I don't know, it's weird. But the other thing is that there is going to be worse players in the batting order than Sanju Samson, right? I mean, we both agree with looking at the squad that they have on paper at the moment. There are going to be players in that side who are not as good at batting as Sanju Samson. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think you'd say he's definitely in better batting form than Shivan Dubey, and
Yeah,
is he not a better batter than Rinku Singh in T20 cricket?
yeah, right.
And I'd say he's a
So
better batter than Jitesh Sharma as well. Maybe not for that specific role, but as a general batter, I'd still take Sanju over Jitesh.
you're ending up in this sort of situation where they are backing a lot of guys who, one of which is in bad form. The other one didn't face many balls last year. The other one who's quite a short form batter anyway, like as in even within T20 cricket, Jitesh is not going to face a lot of balls for you. So it's a really interesting decision that they've made then here, right? It's not as if this is. I'm trying to think of like maybe what would their dream middle order have been a couple of years ago? Maybe like Rohit at 6. Let's say like Rohit was still batting like down the order at like number 5 or 6, and you had Hardik Pandya there, right? Like, and you had more of a sort of a dream sort of combo. It's not like he's being pushed out for this generational talent. We're talking about good IPL players with high upside, but also very low downside as well. I don't know. It just feels a bit of an odd one to make that choice with that kind of player. Because the other thing with Sanju Samson is that he's not an actual anchor in any way, but he could also play that role if they needed him to go down that. I would say he's got the skills and the temperament to be able to do that. So it's a very, it just feels like to me, they've just decided that it is time to move on, that they've found something within his game that they don't particularly like.
Yeah, so the main issue for him does seem to be high pace, but it's like how many teams do have high pace and multiple high pace bowlers all at the same time? So again, it's like,
here's my question for you. We didn't write about it in the piece, but here's my question for you. In a World Cup final, right? This is Asia Cup, so I don't know how quick Shaheen Afridi's bowling at the moment. There are some quicker bowlers, obviously. Naheem
Shaheen's not bowling that quick.
Others.
He's probably in mid 130s.
Yeah, and Naseem's not bowling that quick. So there aren't that many.
Naseem's not in the team.
Yeah, well, he's bowling even slower. But there aren't many guys bowling. It's not like the old days where Pakistan had 3 guys bowling 90 miles an hour, right?
Yeah, interestingly, Pakistan have Harisar, but they recently didn't pick him in the Tri-Series final because they played 2 spinners. So if they're going to do that, he won't play anyway.
So if you make it to the World Cup final at the moment, we'd probably say that the teams you're most likely to play are going to be Australia, South Africa, and let's throw England in there, right? If you want to put New Zealand in there as well. But the other Asian sides have all dropped off, right? Someone might have a blistering tournament here. We might change our mind. But at the moment, it looks like most of the Asian sides have dropped off. That means that you do have to go through multiple quicks at the other end. So my question to you is, do you think that is a realistic issue for Sanju Samson? Do you think it was just a weird series because Jofra Archer and Mark Wood were both bowling really, really well and caused an issue that maybe, I don't know, Mitchell Stark and Pat Cummins might not, well, not Mitchell Stark anymore, but Josh Hazelwood and whoever it may be, Nantare Berger and Bavada, who it is, right? Do you think it's a realistic issue that Sanju Samson has, or was it just a period that some good guys were bowling really well to him and he got a bit stuck?
So I do think he has issues with him. I don't think he's as bad as he looked at times in that series. Like, do I think he'll average 15 versus it? No. Do I think he's like Virat Kohli versus high pace? Also no. But again, we always talk about this, right? He's got other elite skills, where we'll talk about it in a bit later when we discuss his IPL career. If he's got other elite skills, he just needs to be competent versus high pace. And I do think he is competent versus high pace. Like, there's very few times. He's not like, I think, some Indian batters in the 90s where they're like, you put them against anyone that's over 140, they'll find a way to get out. He's not that bad for me, right?
No.
Like, so I don't think there's much issue with it, especially because even though, like, if he, what we don't know is does he struggle versus high pace, or like is it high pace? Is it over 90 miles an hour constantly?
Well, that's what I kind of mean.
Yeah,
because I do think there is a possibility with South Africa and England that you might have to go up against high pace to win the tournament, right? Like that, there's an option that comes up against it. But again, as you said, it's not as if he's forfeiting his wicket from that. And maybe he'll play differently against high pace in the future. Like, who was he opening with? That was Abhishek Sharma, wasn't it? In that series. What's to stop him if he is opening with whoever it may be? What's to stop him from literally knocking the ball around and letting the other guy go whack at that point? Right? Like, and just say to him, you've got so many other elite skills. We don't need you to do this. Just don't go out to it and get yourself off strike, and that's all we're asking for. Because the guy at the other end is likely going to be launching him over cover for 6.
Yeah, definitely. He absolutely can do that. I know it's a different format, but he does have a good ODI record, which does tell me he could maybe just gear down if he really wants to.
What is he?
Like,
Does
I
he
think-
average 50 in ODI cricket?
Yeah, it's what is it, 5,500 or something like that from memory. So he's
Yeah.
got a great ODI record. I don't see like, yeah, obviously, like he's been, because he's played IPL for so long. He's at some point if you play enough IPL, you'll be trained in art of anchoring, because everyone just forces you to be an anchor at some point anyway. So I think he's got that in him. So yeah, I don't see why he couldn't do it. I think the only reason he did it is because there's clear directions from the team for him to attack, and there's no issue with that, right?
No, I think it makes sense, and
Yeah.
I think he went for it. I also think England planned really well. Who was it? Who's the other person that they bounced? Was it Tilak Farmer they bounced in that series as well? England, and someone else got away with it. I can't remember. There was another Indian.
I know
batter
Sky was
anyway.
bad in that series. That I know.
Yeah. No, but there's someone else that I think they also thought had a problem with the short ball, and he got a couple of edges over the top and got some runs. This is the thing of when you are playing that style, and I remember Bangladesh won a game once, and it was for me it was a real realization how much, limited overs cricket was changing. Bangladesh won a game against the West Indies. It was in Somerset, I think, for the 2019 World Cup, where the West Indies just kept bouncing them, right? And Bangladesh kept making mistakes, but they just kept getting top edges over the keeper's head, or top edges over a fine leg or square leg's head. And it's like, that's why that particular weakness it's a tough one. Suresh Raina had a fantastic career, right? And none of us are sitting here saying that he was particularly good at that shot. So, Michael Bevan did okay as well. So,
Shreyas Iyer recently.
Yeah, so it might have been Shreyas Iyer I was thinking about before, actually. But
He wasn't in that series, so.
okay, maybe it was a different series I was looking at.
Yeah.
But the point is that sometimes you can just get those balls away for 4s and 6s really, really quickly, even if you're not playing them well. And so it changes things up. So I think it's a logistic. I think if you're trying to win a World Cup final and you think he has a weakness against that, I think it's a fair conversation to have. But I don't think it's a fair conversation to move him away without him having a second shot at playing those kinds of bowlers in a different role.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly. So we'll just take a quick break. Once we're back, we'll discuss Sanju's IPL career in more detail.
This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community that makes content like this, head over now. My latest book is The Art of Batting. It delves deep into how the best players ever made their runs. Get your copy today.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Footmarks. So Jarrod, so Sanju Samson was an IPO player that I've always rated very highly, because he was almost like, I guess, like the first real generation of that player who decided to sacrifice runs for strike rate. And that we know this, it's maybe common now in Indian cricket, but in the 2010s, almost no one did that. Right? I think if you look at his years, there's several years where his true strike rate's like really good, but his true average is close to neutral or worse. And it's, again, I think as the repeating pattern in Indian cricket and Indian fans, it's if you're someone who sacrifices an average for strike rate, you usually don't get rated or remembered that much, right? Especially if you're on top of that, he also has the tax of batting in the middle overs, which also makes your raw numbers look worse.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. He really did come at it from a different perspective than everyone else. And what I found fascinating, working on this piece was how much he's kind of, and Saurabh wrote this piece, but when I sort of came at it for the rewrites, I was like, it's actually quite fascinating that he was kind of ahead of his time and now he's behind his time. So he's the guy literally saying, I'm not going to bat for my average. And it would have been a hard conversation for someone, especially Rahul Dravid was the one who tapped him on the shoulder, right? Like, it would have been a hard conversation to have. And yet now we're seeing more and more Indian players be like, I'm not going to bat for average. We're going to, try and, make ourselves as efficient or as dynamic as we can. And he was so far ahead of everyone else on that kind of curve, right?
Yeah, I think when he starts it, he's competing with like Murali Vijay. Now he's got Vaibhav Suryavanshi, who's not got an ounce of hesitation in his brain when he's hitting sixes, right? He's basically like a wind-up, so he just slogs until he gets out. Like Rahul Dravid just winds him up before every game. He just keeps slogging, and if he gets out, he gets out, right? That's who he's competing with, and it's like, it's so I feel so bad for him at times because let's be fair, like even though I rate him very high, I think it's fair to say that up until like 2016, he just wasn't ready to go beyond the IPL. I don't think he was. It takes him a long time to get going, and that's perfectly normal because he's very young when he starts.
Yeah, I think his age curve is normal, and we're in an era where Jaiswal and Suryavanshi are freaks and are playing against their age curve, and so you start to look at people like that, and you're like, oh, this other guy hasn't been able to do it. But the truth is that you could argue that even players like Rishabh Pant and Shreyas Iyer were probably starting to develop and become the players that we now know, or the players that they could be at 21, 22, 23. But more normally would be 24, 25, 26, right? That's when you start to see those sorts of players break through. And Samson's pattern is very, very normal. But because of that, he does have because of his age, he does have an element. I think you were spot on, actually, when you just said that if you look at other players, there is an element of they can't help but hesitate or think, right? And, if you're watching some of the younger players come through now, Fraser McGurk was probably one of the first ones we saw that. Now, Suryavanshi, they're not even thinking about normal batting, right? Like they're literally just pressing the button, and trying to hit the ball as hard as possible. And Samson's probably somewhere between a normal batter and this new model, which again should mean that he has more flexibility and when things are going wrong, but it's not quite how teams are seeing it at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely right. So again, it's interesting. You were talking about Rishabh Pant. Is one of the reasons why I don't know if you're very familiar with Sanju Samson fans, Jarrod. But that's where the Justice for Samson, the title of the Sweat Marks, comes from. Is there seems to be like his fans are. It's obviously not as big a fan base as like Virat or Rohit or Dhoni, but they're very loyal and they're very loud at times as well. It's like it's always a grand conspiracy that he never gets into the Indian team, and there's. Like everyone hates him. There's like an agenda going on or something. But as we already established, up until 2016, he just wasn't ready. And then 2017, when he starts to get good, that's the same time MS Dhoni is still playing for India. Like a big mistake, sticking with Dhoni in T20 internationals at that point, even as a Dhoni fan. Also at that time, that is the peak of KR Rahul as a batter. And KR Rahul can bat anywhere from 1 to 4 and also can keep. That's also the time frame roughly where Rishabh Pant, people like Pants were so bad in this season, people I think forget. Rishabh Pant from 2017 to 2019 was a raging lunatic. That's one of the greatest 3-year stretches ever. So I absolutely cannot blame India for looking at that time and thinking, well, Samson's really good, but we think KL Rahul and Rishabh Pant are better. Now we could absolutely argue India absolutely fucked up how they used KL Rahul and Rishabh Pant in the T20 international side, but you cannot blame them for picking them over Samson.
No, I think everyone you've mentioned so far has the possibility of being an S-tier player. And I don't think Samson does, right? I think he's a very good A-tier player, but I'm not sure he has S-tier. Just on the fans, it was something I was going to put into the piece, but in the end I thought against it, which is Samson's from Kerala, right?
Yep.
They are desperate for stars. They're still... It'd be interesting to know. I've been in Kerala for a few years, but the last time I was there, they were just they were talking up Samson then as their next big thing. And it's because who was their last big superstar?
Srishant, I assume.
Right. Didn't end well, did it? Didn't end exactly where you would want it to
Not well at all. Yeah.
So I think there is a desperation from that fan group and that area. And then on top of that, he's in a small market IPL team. Right, so he probably is slightly overlooked at times, and I think he's, the whole justice for Samson. I think we sort of talked about it at the top of the episode about how that sort of goes. But no matter how you look at it, there were just S-tier players around, and this is kind of what we were talking about before, though, as well, which is if you've got an A-tier player in their peak, they're probably going to be more used to you on a game-by-game basis than a potential S-tier player, right? But at that stage, he wasn't in his peak, right?
Yeah.
And so it made sense that they went and looked at these other guys, right? And tried other players who, the 3 players you just named, are just all freaks of nature. You said that KL Rahul could bat anywhere from 1 to 4. That KL Rahul could have probably batted anywhere 1 to 7, right? That original 2017, 2018 version. He was a monster, right? Now
that's the before striker is overrated KL Rahul.
Yeah, that's the before he has a I don't know what would you call it, a born again anchor conversion. But yeah, so I think at that stage you can see it. And so Samson is one of those guys who slips through the cracks, and we see that sometimes, right? Like, you know, there's probably, I think if you were being realistic, there's probably a lot of players from smaller regions in India that where they've had really good players who have just not got picked as much for India as they should have, whereas there are probably very average players from Mumbai and Chennai and Bangalore who've probably been picked. Like, we see that right across all sports, right? You know, the NBA Hall of Fame seems to have a lot of New York Knicks in it that are pretty ordinary compared to some fantastic players who are not in the Hall of Fame. Like, it's a very normal thing. And, you know, Samson has probably ended up being that. Like, I don't know, for how long at Rajasthan has he been kind of the best player or the most important player? Like, for a good period of his time, he's been that. But he's not done that at KKR, right? He's not done that at Mumbai or at Chennai. And they're the three teams that win everything and that everyone gets the attention for.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing is, right, I think we could respect the fact that Sanju is a high intent batter. But you could probably make an argument with this certain Rajasthan season where he almost needed to be an accumulator because they didn't really have another batting star, right? Because the way I look at Sanju Samson is especially because he's not like a raging lunatic like I think Abhishek, or he's not like a consistent run scorer like Virat, for example. You almost need him to be with other great players. For example, I think Sanju is a fantastic player when Rajasthan had Jaiswal and Butler making runs. That's a very good combo. That's a good 1-2 punch. But I don't think Sanju is ever the star of the team that you build the team around. He's always someone you slot in as a role player. Would you agree with that?
He's probably not a role player. He's probably a low-end star, isn't he?
Okay, I think that's fair.
I think if you want to win championships, you want Sanju to be your third best player.
Yeah.
And there have probably been times where he's been the first or second best player in that franchise. As you said, Josh Butler certainly had periods. I think if he's your second or third best player, if he's your third best batter, you've got a really good side, right? Like that's a fantastic team. And maybe when they had Butler, Samson, and Hetmeyer, they had a very good structure. The problem was that they had kind of nothing else around that at that point.
Jaiswal too, right?
Yeah, but he was quite young then, wasn't he? Like, you know, I would have thought for the Butler Hetty sort of period, Jaiswal was just coming through at that point. But yeah, I think you never want him to be the main star, and that comes back to what we were saying before. He's probably not quite an S tier player, and at times he's probably been paid like one and treated like one. And there's a reason why he is, because not only is he an Indian player, but he's an Indian player who has leadership skills, who can keep, right? Like, he ticks a lot of different boxes. And so that's why, as you said, he's probably somewhere, like, you've got him as a role player. I would probably say he's a low-end star, right? Like, but he's probably sort of in that middle range there, which again means he's a little bit more vulnerable. But he then finds enough form to go off and average 50 in ODIs and be India's opening T20 player. And that probably, I think if you're a role player, you probably don't get those opportunities.
Yeah, I think, what is he averaging for India? Like 30 at 180 nearly as an opener. So he's got 300s as an opener somehow.
It's a lot of hundreds, isn't it?
Yeah, like it's like filth of famine, wasn't it, at one point? He's either getting a duck or 100 for like a good streak, right? It was absolutely insane. So one of the things which I think with Sanju is a bit underrated, I want to talk more about this, is his ability to hit spin, where it's almost almost like in a Suresh Raina successor kind of way. He's fantastic at hitting spin, especially in those middle overs. And I think that specific skill, I don't think does get rated very highly in the IPL, right? We've seen this, like Raina got underpaid for years by Chennai. Right. At least, like, on paper, we don't know how much he was getting paid off it, but let's say on paper, right? Raidu was the other one.
Pablo Torre, you won't get that. But continue.
Let's say Raidu was the other one, but Samson, I think he has some elite years versus spin, doesn't he?
No, definitely, and I think in general, it's probably something that Indian cricket is still coming to terms with. There's probably been an overcorrection to respecting guys when they're really good against pace now, because of so many years where they had so many players who were there are so many Indian players who probably averaged around 40 to 44 and were maybe in the top 2 or 3 best players of spin at that time, but couldn't play pace, as you said before. And now there's a bit of an overcorrection to being like, how good do you play pace? and that's how you're looked at. Whereas actually, it's still a lot of spinning ball. I can't even say the word. Spinning ball. A lot of spinning ball being bowled at you. And so the ability to come down the wicket and use your feet to attack, to keep it going, because not everyone does that, right? You know, Virat Kohli was never really that kind of player. KL has never really been that kind of player. So finding that kind of player, I think, is really important. And, you know, I know people like Robbie hate how much Glenn Maxwell is paid. Glenn Maxwell smacks spin, right? Like, that's what he does. And in some ways, India has probably gone away from those kinds of players who could just come in and Navjot Sidhu their way against spin. And because of that, Heinrich Klaasen and Glenn Maxwell are the ones that get all the money, right? And Shivam Dubé was maybe one big swing back, or a few big swings in his case, back towards that. But there really should be more Indian players who can do that. And Sanju Samson has that ability.
That's also partly because even the Indian players that could smash spin were being forced into becoming anchors, right?
Yeah.
Like Shreyas Iyer is one of the best players of spin in the world. How long was he just knocking spin about? Nitish Rana is the other one, I think, in the IPL, right? Like, why are you just not smashing spin? You're just clearly very good at it, right?
I've got a feeling that, and I was really shocked at this, but I did a whole T20 system a while back to see how many players struck faster against spin than pace. Just raw numbers, right? And I think it was Cameron Akmal, right? And it might have been Chris Gale. And it was really noticeable to me that it wasn't there weren't any Indian players up there. And, you know, there's no, as you said, there's no real reason for that. And you think of someone like Pujara. I don't know how he fits in modern T20 cricket or anything. But during his era, couldn't he have scored at a run a ball off the pace bowlers and scored at a strike rate of 160 versus spin? Like, am I misunderstanding how good he was against spin? I don't think so. You know, so there should be that kind of player is missing, and Samson is maybe, again, as you say, that kind of missing link between those two generations.
Yes, I was looking at it. So since 2017, because that's when both of us agree that Samson kind of hits his own stride. He has a true strike rate of 16 versus spin and 9 versus pace. Pretty good numbers, you'd say. I think that's very impressive numbers, in my opinion.
It's worth saying that why that's so impressive is, so if you can be a plus against both kind of bowlers, and I've seen this sometimes, you know, especially when I've been doing commentary for TalkSport or I've been doing the watch-alongs for Cricket 8, you think to yourself, well, what do you bowl to Samson here? There isn't really an option, right? Whereas you do know with Virat, it's like, yeah, he might come down the wicket and hit one down over the top of the spinner, but he's going to knock around a lot of balls. Babar Azam and, you know, Mohammad Rizwan, you bring spinners on. They're good players to spin, but they're just going to knock it around, right? KL Rahul's another one. Samson doesn't allow that, right? He doesn't allow that. And the other thing, again, it wasn't in the piece. I could have written about, I think the original piece was about 3,000 words. We cut it down a little bit, but I think I could have written about 5,000 words on Sanju Samson, because I think the other interesting thing for me is he makes it very hard to set a field to him because of a bit like you mentioned Shreyas Iyer before, his ability to go over cover against spin and pace means that you can't even set a field that just stops him, right? So it's not like you're going up against Maxwell or Klaasen where you're just like, oh my God, he's going to hit 4 sixes in this over. But it does mean that he can sort of play controlled hitting without the ability for you to put 5 guys on the boundary that are going to stop him scoring a boundary. Like, because of that cover thing. And I remember there was one game he played where he almost won the game for Rajasthan on his own, and they ended up just putting out a deep cover because it was a short boundary and he just kept popping the ball over cover's head. So again, that's one of the reasons that I really like him as a player, is that there are so many different strengths to his game. It's not as easy to game plan for him as it is for someone else.
Yeah, we were also looking at true strike rate versus spin by year for Samson, right? So since I believe since 2020, he has 3 seasons where his true strike rate versus spin was over 40. Like that's almost an insanity level territory, isn't it? Right, that's elite hits territory. That's like Klaasen Puran at the best kind of territory. Like, and he's insane, right? So I think the 2020s is where even I'm like become a believer of justice for Samson, because there are times where I'm like, surely he gets in ahead of maybe like the anchor Shreyas Iyer or like Manish Pandey was playing as a finisher for India at that point. I'm pretty sure there was a good 1 or 2 year period. I'm like, is he not better than both of them? Should he not have deserved a consistent run in the Indian side, at least at that point when, you know, KL Rahul was probably becoming an anchor? Then Rishabh Pant maybe just couldn't crack it, right?
Yeah, and I think some of it was probably at that stage he was playing the kind of game that India wasn't really respecting. Is that fair to say that he was playing that sort of, and I think once Rahul Dravid comes in, there's a big switch towards Samson's style of game. I don't know if Samson has anything to do with that, of course, but
Imagine
I
saying
think
that sentence in 2022, by the way.
yeah. But I do think there's a big change at that point to playing that kind of cricket and bringing about that style. Whereas beforehand, you look at the sort of players that they had, and that they were valuing, it was probably a different kind of player. So just when would they? Yeah. So if you look from what 2017 onwards, or when's the best? When's peak Samson? Do you think?
I'd say 2020 onwards is where I'd put my money on. 2020
Yeah.
to
So
2024, let's give it.
So if we look at from 2020 onwards, so Sky, Rohit, Virat, Hardik, KO. So Shreyas Iyer is the next one, and he's got a strike rate of 138, averaging 33. Samson is the next most used player in that period. He's got 41 games, 842 runs, at a strike rate of 155. But there's a lot of Gaikwad. Ishan Kishan played 32 matches in that time, which I think Ishan Kishan fans have realised that I've been out on him for a long time now. But I still think he will come good, by the way. But I just think he was picked way too early. Deepak Huda played 21 games.
I remember.
Right?
That was, I think, when people were like, oh, Deepak Huda should replace Virat in the World Cup, by the way. Good times that.
Deepak Huda actually has better numbers for India than he ever did anywhere else.
Yeah.
Washi played a lot of games as well. As you said, Manish Pandey is still, he plays, 7 games in 2020 as well. So, and Tripathi. I knew there was another player like that. So you've got Tripathi in there. That's a lot of, sometimes Samson would be in the team with some of those guys, right? And some of those would have been experimental teams and everything else. But there's a lot of guys I've just mentioned who are not as good as Samson over their career or at their peaks, right? And so there has been certainly an element of, in that, without getting too in the justice for Samson situation, I think it's absolutely fine for, Rishabh Pant and Carroll and these other guys to be ahead of him. I think you're starting to struggle a little bit more if you're trying to sell Rahul Tripathi ahead of Sanju Samson for mine, right? Like, I think that at that stage, it's probably a fair conversation to have of where do they rate him? And I think India just don't believe he's S tier, and because of that, they think they can find a younger or more dynamic S tier hitter or player around him. And so instead of him being rewarded for being a very consistent scorer at a very high strike rate over a long period of time, he ends up sort of being the opposite of that, right? And ends up sort of being the scapegoat or the one easy to move on from. And also, it's fair to say that you're right. He's done great as an opener for India, but I don't think he's made that many runs when he hasn't opened for India. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the other question I had to ask for you, because one thing I always felt about Sanju was, for me, like, I always thought he would be better as an opener, because I remember looking this up one of these days, was because when he starts, he usually chips a lot of balls. I don't think he full sends it. And for me, if you're that sort of a player, you're better as an opener because your margin for error is greater in the power play. The other person I feel that way about is Rishabh as well. So I think I remember, so we did it for this piece, where if you look at Samson's IPL numbers when he enters in the power play, it's actually much better than when he's starting in the middle overs, right? I think my assumption and my theory is that that's because he's chipping a lot of the balls straight to the fielder's hands. And I don't know if I feel like he's such an interesting batter in that sense, because, like, do you know how when you're watching Washington in Test cricket, you feel like he's 3,500 every game?
Yeah.
I feel that way with Sanju in IPL, where it's like every time I feel like I've watched him in the last 5 years, he's always 36 or 24 for some reason. I don't know why that is. Like, I can't explain it.
No, I think you're right. But the other issue is that you go back to see some of those names I was talking about before, right? Deepak Huda and players like that. It's harder to find 5, 6, 7 batters, right? Because what happens is, and I think Robbie might have talked about this as well, if you're the best player in Kerala, you're going to bat in the top order. You're not going to bat at 5, 6, and 7, right? Especially if you're from a smaller team. You go to the IPL, and where are you going to get more of your money? Again, unless you're an all-rounder, it's going to be at 1, 2, 3, maybe, or probably 1, 2, 3, probably 1 and 2, if we're being honest, more often than not. So you get sucked into that. Whereas actually, Samson with his skills, his high-end skills of smashing spin around, probably would make more sense if he batted in the middle order. And if he batted in the middle order consistently, what you're looking at, that pattern, may not be as big a deal, right? Because he would have had to work his way through that. But of course, for an IPL team, he should be in the top 3, right? And you know,
especially for RR, isn't it?
Yeah. So then you end up in this situation where he can't actually maybe get the skills he wants. And to go back to what we were saying before about guys like Shivam Dubé and Rinku Singh, it's not that they're not fantastic hitters of the ball, and well, Shivam Dubé maybe won't develop all that much more, but they're limited in some ways, right? What India really needs to do is work out how to make players who are not limited, like Sanju Samson, into players who can be very, very good batting at 5, 6, 7 for that national side, right? And that's, I think, the next step, because once you get there, I think everything opens up. Whereas at the moment, it's like the 5th best opener from India may not get in the side anymore, but they might be the 9th best opener in world cricket.
Jaiswal is a perfect example, right? Yeah, so it's interesting because I do think even when India, there was a period where even when they were picking top order players, they were trying to force them to be 4s and 5s, which, I guess even Australia did that, right? The Australia just told Mike Hussey, I don't care if you're an opener, just bat at 7 for us, right? It's like there is an element of that. I don't know what's the right way to do it. Do you pick specialists, or do you just go with the old school test mentality of, well, you're 7 best batters, figure your shit out, figure your role out at this point?
Yeah, I think there are players who just can do that. And also, looking back on it, Mike Hussey was probably batting in the wrong spot for Western Australia, not for Australia.
Okay.
So I'm not sure Mike Hussey was an opener. But if you go back to the team he was playing in, they would have had Damien Martin, Murray Goodwin, I'm trying to think who else, Justin Langer. They had this, Tom Moody would have been playing when Mike Hussey was playing, right? Adam Gilchrist would have been batting maybe at 5 or 6 as well. The middle order was stacked. So when Mike Hussey's coming through that side, where do you fit Mike Hussey in, right? So maybe he could have been a middle order player. There aren't many players like Mike Hussey, but the difference now is, would a Mike Hussey be able to bat at 6 and 7? And I chatted to Dinesh Karthik about this briefly, and I want to get him on the podcast to discuss this with him, of how he did it. Because he's a fascinating one of someone who did actually legitimately reinvent themselves as a 6 and 7 after batting, everywhere. But does everyone have that possibility? Whereas in Hussey's day, you didn't need to have power at the end, right? You didn't need to hit 6s. I think it'd be very hard for Samson to suddenly be a number 6 or a 7, right, for the Indian side. Whereas Australia had Marcus Stoinis. So with him, you're like, well, it's fine, because if Marcus Stoinis bats at 6 or 7, he can miss hit 6s, right? And so it was a very different kind of player. So the roles are maybe more different now. That doesn't mean that there won't be players that you can find that can do that, right? That this is such a weird call, but I think about Vinu Mankad as a T20 player a lot, right? I'll let that resonate with the audience, because I know he could hit the ball very hard, right? But he didn't. He wasn't a fast-scoring player. In this day and age, maybe you wouldn't use him as an opener because that's where you'd have your better batters than him, right? But if you could get Vinu Mankad to bat at 6 or 7 and use his power, that would be fantastic, right? And I think that there is an element of trying to work out who these sorts of players are and how you can move them around. But the other way of doing it is just actually letting them play in those positions a lot of the time, and that's really hard in modern cricket because, as I said, you're sucked back to the top of the order.
Yeah, so that's one of the thing we have to talk about is I don't think the trade system in IPL is good enough where, because if I was let's say if I was in their place, what I'd be looking at is going, what spots in the Indian team are non-existent, and that would probably be 5, 6, and 7, and I'd see which team needs a 5, 6, 7 and ask for a trade, right? That's what you probably that's the sort of thing you should be doing. Or in your own team, you can maybe ask for a different role. So I don't know if you remember this, just before the T20 World Cup, KL Rahul wanted to bat at 5 for LSG, but I don't know whether he changed his mind or whether they told him we need you to open, right? Where I was like, that's probably what you should be doing, right? If you're a player KL Rahul, even right now, I think he for Delhi was batting at 4 or 5 most of the time. that's the smart thing to do. If you're a young Indian batsman, would you not just purposefully choose to bat at 5, 6, 7? Even though you may stand out less, but that's an easier way for you to get into the Indian side than forcing yourself to be a top three. But you either need to have like an Abhishek Sharma style strike rate or like a Virat Kohli style accumulation run. And both those things are surely much harder than just cracking 5 and 6, right? Does that what I'm saying make sense?
It does, but you're probably going to get paid more in the IPL if you bat in the top 3. So is it worth it to take a pay cut and then become the 5 and 6? And then we both know what's going to happen. If you do it at a team with a really good batting lineup, that's fine. Everyone's like, awesome. He's doing exactly what we need. If you're doing it at a team where no one ahead of you in the order's making any runs, what is the owner going to say? What are the coaches going to say? You're going to be like, get it back to the top of the order and let's do this properly. So I think there's still this incredible vacuum. You know, I always thought with England was the one team that didn't have to move Joss Buttler back in their peak, right? Because they had no issue finding openers, right? Alex Hales couldn't even always get in the side. Bairstow couldn't always get in the side. They had so many other players that they could have thrown into that position at any stage that would have been good, right? They didn't have another Joss Buttler to bat at number 5 or number 6. And when you have a player like that and you have the other players around them, it makes sense to keep Joss Buttler down the order. But where did Joss Buttler end up, man? Right? Even he was eventually sucked into that top position. And if Kieron Pollard, you know, when I was with St. Lucia, we moved Kieron Pollard from 5 to 4, right? For a similar reason. We were like, we need Kieron Pollard to face more deliveries. And he's still really useful at the back end. But our team had Darren Sammy in it, right? There was someone else as well. And we had KS Ahmed. We had guys who could come in and hit sixes at the end. What we didn't have, right, was a number 4 who could do that other role. And so your best players generally do get sucked into the top, whether you want them to be or not. And I think in the future, that's the big thing of, are there going to be enough players who are going to be like, it's worth me doing this? Also, financially, if you're an Indian player and you're an Indian star, how much does that add to your overall earnings? Right? Robbie can't even fully explain this. Like, I don't know. Maybe we'd have to talk to a bunch of agents, right, to fully understand this. But if you're an Indian star, not an ordinary player, but let's say you're India's number 6 and you're just smashing the ball everywhere and everyone's talking about how great you are, how much money does that pour into your pocket via advertising and everything else?
Well, who's the person? Is that MS Dhoni? Maybe? He's the only one who's done it in Indian cricket, right? Like, so someone who's a star batting at 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, but I mean, Kapil Dev, I suppose, is the other one, right? Like, of that kind.
I think I'd argue that's before all the endorsements.
No, but what I mean is, I think if you're an all-rounder, you're expected about 5 and 6 and 7.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Kapil Dev, so with MS Dhoni, it makes more sense. But I'm talking about if you're a specialist batter and you make that call, right? I think that's very different than being Hardik Pandya or being MS Dhoni or someone like that. So that gets us back to Dinesh Karthik, right? That is really risky for a couple of reasons. One is, as we saw, was it Rinku Singh last year who didn't face any balls, or was it the other? Was it Ramandeep Singh who didn't face any balls last year? Yeah, you can go through a whole year with not facing any balls. I've seen it happen to Kieron Pollard, right? Like, I've seen it happen to Tim David. I've seen all these different players at different things where you don't face a ball. Now, some other kid bats it. Smashatosh comes in at number 6, right, and hits a bunch of runs. It's a riskier thing than just going, I made 500 runs again last year, averaging 35 with a healthy strike rate, right? So, for India to maximize as a team, that's what needs to happen. Whether that can ever truly happen, I don't know. And the other thing that we need to get past in international cricket is that, you know, let's call this the forward alarm rule, right? Which is, domestically, teams still don't trust players who bat lower than 4, right? Because it's not as tough a job. T20 cricket has changed that enough, I think, but you don't get the same amount of respect as you do if you're an opener or a first drop, right? You just don't. It's really clear, and we see it all the time. So there has to be a big mindset change for all that. But your general point is right. And I was making this, I've had this conversation with international team selectors before of like, how do you know this guy could do this job if you haven't put them in that position until they get to a World Cup? You're just hoping it works, right? Surely you have to be better than that.
Yeah, definitely right. Again, it's such a weird thing, but I'm a bit hopeful because, unlike let's say like in 2018-19, there were almost no finishes being produced, Indian finishes being thrown out of the IPL. Like at least now we have names, or we've had Rinku come up, we've had Ashutosh, we've had Shashank Singh, like Jitesh Sharma. They will at least names are coming up now, which makes me a bit more hopeful than so I do expect it to get better. Like I do expect it to get better.
Yeah, what one of those players is as rounders as Marcus Stoinis. They might be better hitters.
That's fair.
And I think that's the interesting one going ahead, because Marcus Stoinis won Australia a World Cup, right? Because of the way he played against Pakistan. And if that was Tim David in that same position, he probably just doesn't, because he's not as rounded. And he would have had to come in when the spinners were still on. Tim David would have got himself a bit, he would have been too early. It would have been what, the 12th over, 13th over, right? Yeah. Bit too early for Tim David to come in. And we see that with some of those guys you say before. And that, I think that's the bigger thing. That's the Mike Hussey thing that you're really talking about, right? Which is, are we in a situation in modern cricket where we need to find a way for the most talented batters and the most rounded batters to also be able to close out innings, so that when we get to a major tournament and Mark Wood is bowling the 14th over and your team's in trouble, that you don't have someone who just can't face Mark Wood because Mark Wood's too fast for them. Right? Because that's how you win World Cups, right? And I think that's the interesting thing going ahead of, like, does there need to be a fundamental change of where the best batters go in the order? And I don't know if there can be, but that's probably, if I was not an Indian selector, but if I was an India director of cricket and I was looking for the next 10 years, that would be one of my major questions, right? Of how do we get to a situation where we have a great young batter who is now the world's best number 6, right? And so, and at that stage, good luck to anyone else beating them.
Yeah, definitely right. So again, it's going back to the Shil Shubman Gill discussion, because I think that's why India wants him. They for example, if we take our man Kartikeya again, he's always like, you should just pick 7 hitters and don't forget about it. He's right in the sense that like that should be the future of T20 cricket. Where I probably differ from him is that I still maybe believe that you need 1 or 2 batters who have good red ball skills. I think people often confuse that with anchors. It's like that's 2 different things, right? You can be a hitter and who has a good red ball background. Like AB de Villiers is a perfect example of that. So like, because what someone with a great red ball skills can do is they know that they have a better situational awareness than blind T20 hitters. That's essentially what we're talking about is. And Sanju isn't a good red ball batter. Like maybe the way I would look at it is that's why maybe I'm a bit more old school in that sense. Is even if you're a T20 player, play as much red ball cricket as you possibly can, because it will just round out your game in a very different way, won't it?
Yeah, and I think what's Sanju's first class record?
Was it mid-30s? I think it's mid-30s. Yeah, I don't think it's very good. Okay. Yeah.
Wow. I would have thought he would have averaged way more than that.
Let me just confirm this before.
39. No, it's 39.
Okay.
So yeah.
It's not horrible. Okay, that's not bad.
No. It's weird. There's a couple of guys out there like that. But to me, I think you're right. He has the ability to... we talked about very high-end pace. But other than that, there isn't anything that you're like, he can't face. Whereas... I think there have been times when I've watched Shivan Dubé play, sometimes in the IPL, but sometimes for India, where I was like, he does not have the technical skills available to him at the moment. And he averages more in first-class cricket, by the way. But my guess is that would be a lot lower down the order. But he does not have the technical skills here to be able to get himself out of this problem. And so he either gets stuck or he slogs, right? And I don't mean hits, I mean slogs. And that's Tim David, right? That's what you would say of someone like Tim David as well, where they don't have the technical skills to be able to get through something like that. And I do think when you're trying to win World Cups, this is why I understand why teams maybe don't defer to anchors, but get obsessed with guys who also are very good. But if you're trying to win a World Cup and Jasprit Bumrah is going to have to bowl 2 of the last 4 overs, right? And you have a bunch of guys who are hitters, not batters, and the wicket's doing anything at all, or Jasprit's doing anything at all, you're in trouble, right? If you've got to go through Rabada at the death, right? If Rashid Khan's on a tear, right? If Sunil Narayan's playing well. You've got to be able to get through the next couple of balls. For most T20 cricket, you don't. And it doesn't matter. No one's ever going to remember it. But once the winning World Cups, I think, is a very different level of cricket than any other kind of T20 cricket. It's very different than even the IPL. And I think once you get to that level, you are, what was South Africa and India's bowling attack in the World Cup finals, right? Those bowling attacks were probably better than any IPL attacks. Is that fair to say?
Easily.
Off the top of your head?
Yeah, easily.
Right? So that's a different format of cricket. And also you're generally at that stage not facing, I was going to say Xavier Ellis type players, right? Nathan Ellis. Xavier Ellis was a footballer.
Xavier Doherty was a bowler, wasn't he? Yeah.
Nathan Ellis type players. I'm not having a go at Nathan Ellis, but Nathan Ellis I would put again in that Shivam Dubé type of role, right? Whereas he's a 2020 bowler, and you know how to go up against a 2020 bowler, right? But if Jai Richardson has the ball and he's got a functioning arm, that's a test bowler.
No.
Right? That's a very, very different challenge at that point when you've got all that pressure on you. And so I think that's what you're really talking about, is that next step. I still think, how do we get someone like Suryavanshi to come through the system where he has all the skills to be able to handle a Trent Bolt spell when it's swinging around corners, right? Sunil Narayan on a sticky wicket, but also the minute those things are not in his favour, he just presses the 6 button. And I think that's what you need more than what Kartikeya wants, because if you just want hitters, you're just going to have a lot of limited players. The reason they're hitters is because they don't have the rest of their game, right? Andre Russell was a very good first-class player. He didn't play a lot of first-class cricket, but he was a very good first-class player who I think would have been a very good test player as well, right? That's very different than Tim David.
Yeah, even
right?
The entire West Indies team had that, right? Karen Pollard had a decent first-class background. Brain Brower has hundreds in Australia with the bat. Against
the good side as well.
Yeah.
And I think if you talk to those guys, they actually think that one of the reasons that West Indies has had a drop-off, and I think this is a little bit incorrect, but one of the reasons they believe that the West Indies had a drop-off was that next generation didn't have to go through the sort of the first-class crucible, right? And making runs and understanding it. Whereas Kieran Pollard has played, 20 or 30 first-class games. He played a lot of sort of second-tier first-class red ball cricket when he was coming through. He's made 4 first-class hundreds. And again, Kieran Pollard probably could have played Test cricket if that had been the only form of cricket he played. I don't think he would have been as successful as Andre Russell would have been at it, but I don't think Kieran Pollard would have been that much worse as a Test cricketer than Darren Sammy was.
Yeah.
Right? Again,
he's the other one who had a red ball background. Yeah,
another Test player, and so those guys, when they're in a high-level situation, have Carlos Brathwaite was a Test player, right? The first time I saw Carlos Brathwaite was not in the CPL. It was slogging Australia around at whichever ground that was, right? These players have this proper background. And I think that's the evolution is, can you get Kane Williamson, the next Kane Williamson, to play as Kane Williamson when he has to play as Kane Williamson and play as Suryavanshi when he has to, or play as Tim David when he has to, right? As that down the order player. And that's the thing that no one knows how to get to, because as we talked about, this incredible vacuum. And so if Sanju Samson was as good as he is at the top of the order at number 5 or number 6, wouldn't he have been a mainstay of this Indian side for best part of the last 6 or 7 years?
Yeah, definitely. At least post Dhoni's retirement, without a question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, and again, that gets back to the original question is it worth more to be a top order player who makes regular runs in the IPL and infrequently plays for India, or is it better to be a superstar in the middle order but know that you can go out of favour? I don't even know what the answer to that is. But if I'm a manager to a player, and these are the sorts of conversations players have to have, right? They have to work this out. So I think there's so many fascinating aspects to Sanju Samson as a player, and the way that he speaks about the past and the future.
So, Jarrod, let's just end this with, as usual, as what everyone wants, the Indian team selection again. So,
wouldn't it be funny if he gets picked for the first Asia Cup game, by the way?
That was going to ask you, is he in your first 11? If he's in your first 11, where would he bat, given that it's basically been confirmed that Gill will open?
I suppose he's a first drop if he's not opening, isn't he? I mean, that's the
Hmm.
only other spot. I know we saw him try and play middle order once or twice for Kerala, didn't he? And you know, it didn't quite go the way he wanted. But I think first drop is where he's probably played most of his career, hasn't he?
Yeah.
It's opening has more been for India. He's almost an ideal first drop because, as you said before, he has the ability to punch the ball over the top. He's not afraid of he's not afraid of seam bowling. Like he's got a plus record against seam bowling, and he'll also face a bit more spin than an opener will. So I think that's a very, very good situation for someone like him to play in. But I don't. That's the position where don't they kind of have a couple of guys who can bat at first drop already?
Yeah, Tilak Verma. He's had an incredible record. He's actually funnily.
And Sky?
Funnily,
Won't Sky
actually,
also be?
he's Skies at 4. Funnily, Tilak is one of those batsers, I think, where
But
Mumbai Indians playing him at 5 actually really helped this Indian game because he's more rounded, I think, because of that. His top end
I
is
think
actually
you're right.
incredibly good. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, I would say that Sky and Tilak have a better call to be at number 3 than Samson.
Yeah.
So now you're in a situation where you're moving perhaps better players for Samson. So I don't think there is a way to move him into this side. I mean, I think it's absolutely bananas to pick someone as a vice captain anyway in modern cricket, because I just don't know what the point of it is anymore. But if they want Gill to open, then they want Gill to open, that's fine. But yeah, then he's in this weird other position, and that's just where he is.
Yeah, again, going back to like people don't like Gill replacing Samson, but let's just say Jaiswal is picked. Would you not even open with him ahead of Samson anyway? Like, so either way, we'd be having this discussion, right?
I think at the moment, this is what I think we talked about this before. If I was going into a major tournament, I would pick Samson over Jaiswal. Not because I think he's a better player, because I think he knows exactly what player he is.
I think that's fine.
And I think sometimes I watch Jaiswal and I'm like, I don't think he knows when he's supposed to be slogging and when he's supposed to be attacking and when he's supposed to be hitting. And I think having Suryavanshi at the other end has actually made it harder for him to work out what style he needs to play in. Also, sometimes he gears back against the spin for no reason.
I was going to just mention that. I think his strike rate was 135 in the middle. I was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, I don't know if that's technical, intentional, or like the team asked him. Like,
so if it's Asia Cup, I'd probably pick Jaiswal. If it's World Cup, I'd probably pick Samson at the moment. Just because and that's the thing of what I hope they don't do is go, well, Samson's done. And I think that's really what we were trying to get through in the piece, which is there actually aren't that many players like Sanju Samson, even in India, right? So you don't want to be in a situation where you're just moving on from that person. You want to understand that what he can bring to your side, and so you bring him back again and again. And I think the issue that when you talk about the 30-year-olds, you know that Mike Hussey wasn't brought in to be a regular member of that team, right? He was brought in as a stopgap measure and then worked really well. And I would like to think that the Australians, and they wouldn't have done this, but I would have liked to think that if Mike Hussey had been more normal over the first 20 test matches, so averaging 55 instead of 80, right? And then he'd had a dip, they could have dropped him and then just be like, but you're not out of our plans because we know what you can do. Just work on the thing that you have an issue with and we bring you back. And I think for World Cup specifically, I think that's why I was talking to someone from the Pakistani setup because I did a video about Babar Azam and Mohammad Rizwan not being picked. And they were like, but they haven't really played in that many series coming in. And I went, yes, but generally before major tournaments, big name players come back, right? Yeah. And I think that I don't want it to be the big name players. I want it to be the players that you know and respect and can do the job as professionals should be the ones that come back for that. And so I would hope that Sanju Samson would be on that level going ahead.
Yeah, definitely, right. The other thing is, like, I don't mean this as an insult to Samson. He's the perfect squad player because he can bat anywhere from 1 to 7 and he can give you a keeping option.
Also,
that's why he's in the 2024 side.
Room, have him in the change room. This is not a particularly old side. Right, you take Virat and Rohit and Ashwin and those guys out. You're taking so much institutional knowledge and just wisdom out of that side. To have another guy who's experienced and has been a captain, even if he's not in the side, if something is happening, for him to send a message out to be like, look, let's do this, or those sorts of things. So I think he's definitely very important when it comes to that.
Yeah, I probably would have opened with him in my team. I had him and Abhishek opening because I'm like, if it's working so well, why do you want to change it? But thank you so much for listening, guys. We hope you like this podcast. Make sure to bookmark goodareas.co. We'll see you again next time. We have a lot of interesting stuff coming up. Do watch out for that.
Brian Lara used pot plants to work on his placement. John Wright glued his glove to his bat. Sachin Tendulkar dug up practice pitches. Tatenda Taibu cut the top off his bat. Claire Taylor used a hockey grip. Steve Smith was from tennis. Dean Jones would call phantom runs. And Victor Trumper turned the nets into a war zone to survive. The best batters in the world do whatever they have to make runs. We have told their stories in our new book, The Art of Batting.